Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Fallen Angel Came for Issei Scared Gear. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Issei Haidu whispered to himself, wondering just how Seraphal Leviathan had persuaded him to agree to this as he stalked the first-floor halls of his school. The objective was simple in theory. Enter the room, place a small monitoring spell where it would not be easily found, then distribute the other spells of similar design where he judged them most useful. The problem was that the target of the surveillance was an observant, intelligent young woman with a well-founded suspicion that her older sister might be watching her. As the days passed, Issei's chances of remaining unnoticed were shrinking. Drake told him it was at least half his fault. Issei paused in the hallway, going over recent events and trying to think of a way to deny his part in it. He admitted to himself that he had no idea his offhand comment would be taken so seriously. His attention had been caught up in something else when a friend had asked whether the young woman had been talking to any boys, and he had answered that he had seen her speaking with a blonde that day. That answer had set the whole plan in motion. Seraphal had asked him to set up magical surveillance and leave behind a small prop to act as a distraction for the admirer. Seraphal had insisted that he place the spells and leave a prop as a diversion. He had agreed. He had taken to working harder around her, arriving early, staying late, and volunteering for anything to be near. It was admirable and earnest, but Sona Citri had shown no interest in one particular suitor. Everyone else could see it except him. Issei sighed softly, thinking he should have known better. Most of the lights were already off, leaving the last remnants of daylight as his only light. Being a creature from the underworld, reincarnated or not, Issei could see well in the dim. With some practiced magic and tricks he had learned over the years, he was largely undetectable to normal measures. Drake explained that she had played on his tendency to fixate on the female form. The thought stiffened him for a moment before he refocused on the task and the promised reward. Seraphal had a knack for reading and manipulating people. She had made a simple request and offered something in return, and he had accepted. Their relationship had always been complicated and ambiguous in different ways, and Issei sometimes wished for more clarity. He mentally rehearsed the practical steps, placed the spells, avoid detection, and complete the task. The door he sought was one of many signs that Kuo Academy was overseen by supernatural authority. Many offices had heavy wooden doors, but this one was set apart. The solid wood bore subtle carvings along the trim and a faint magical pattern to identify passing supernatural beings and log family affiliation. Fortunately for Issei, the magic would register a Citri association rather than Leviathan, which would reduce alarms. His partly activated Ghostwalker charm should also make it seem as if the door had not been breached. He slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open, only a few small creaks audible. When he had made enough space, he slipped inside. The Citri peerage had already left for the day, leaving the evenings to Rias and her group. To be cautious, he left the door ajar so he would not make unnecessary noise. The arrangement of duties during the day allowed the students some semblance of normal teenage life while handling their supernatural obligations. Just inside the door was a small waiting area where Sona ran much of the school's day-to-day affairs. His steps were careful as he moved to avoid loose floorboards. He worked methodically, setting the monitoring magic where it would be discreet and effective. When a spot left a small gap after removing something, he filled it with a neutral object so everything appeared undisturbed. He kept his movements slow and deliberate to avoid attracting attention. Drake reminded him again that this whole situation had been set in motion by his earlier remark and his willingness to help. Issei accepted that responsibility and continued, careful not to trigger any of the office's subtle defenses. Once the spells were in place and the distraction set, he paused to check his work, then slipped back out the way he had come, leaving no obvious trace of his presence. The night swallowed him as he headed down the corridor, thinking about the complex requests he had fulfilled and the unpredictable consequences that might follow. He passed the 3 seats on each side and walked over the expensive rug into the main office. Bookshelves lined the wall behind the large desk, and several filing cabinets stood against the left wall. He scanned the room. It was arranged to stay organized and open, with few crevices suitable for hiding anything that emitted occasional demonic pulses. He spotted an air vent in the corner and decided it would be a good hiding place. This first device had to be concealed while still having a clear view, since it was the only video feed. The others would only take pictures throughout the day. Drake warned that if the maid found out about this, she would come and undo everything. Issei used a small wind spell to unscrew the vent, slid the device into place, and told himself he was only following Graphia's request as he tightened the screws. Back in the center of the room, he considered where to place the remaining devices. Drake reminded him that Graphia had called it a favor, not an order. He decided to position them along the corners where wall met ceiling so his king would have a comprehensive view of the room, and to be thorough he placed 4 more around eye level. He pushed distracting thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. Drake warned again that the king might be setting him up to take the blame if their actions were discovered by the Silver Queen of Annihilation. Experience had taught Issei that people who kept pleasant faces sometimes concealed unexpected. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Drake alerted him that someone was coming. The confident click of heels approached, each stride even and purposeful, narrowing the possibilities. The steps stopped and a soft, assured voice called for Sona. Rias Gremory entered. He felt the familiar mix of admiration and awkwardness her presence always brought. He remembered that Surzex was usually easygoing and had once treated an awkward admission from him with surprising understanding. Rias opened the door further and scanned the room. She did not notice Issei, which confirmed that Ghost Walker was working perfectly. He remembered how the technique blended demonic and Greek magic with touches of senjutsu and yujitsu. The Greek element rendered him effectively invisible. Hades' trick created a faint shimmering distortion in a viewer's vision. The yujitsu filled that distortion with an illusion of whatever was behind him, and the senjutsu dissipated his life force into the surroundings. To anyone lacking expertise in those arts, he was undetectable. Rias moved to the filing cabinets and, saying she was running out of time and apologizing to Sona, traced the labels with her finger. She paused at the drawer labeled H, slid it open, and bent down to look through the folders. Issei realized he had no business watching and immediately averted his eyes, forcing himself to step back and refocus on the task. Issei watched Rias in the clubroom, his attention caught by how composed and striking she looked in purple attire. He noted her graceful posture and considered her thoughtful expression. When she located a manila folder in the cabinet, she called for Hookie and then addressed Issei by name. Hearing his name made him freeze. Rias opened the folder slowly. The first thing she looked at was the picture taken at the beginning of the term, and she traced the photo of Issei with her finger. Rias asked if he was the person in the picture and whether he could help her. Her confident voice sounded unexpectedly desperate as she added that she would not accept an arranged marriage or be treated like a trophy. Issei realized she was referring to the engagement to Riser Phoenix. He understood the political logic behind the pairing and why the Phoenix match made sense on paper, but he also knew enough about Riser to see why Rias would refuse. Riser struck Issei as arrogant and entitled, the sort of heir Rias did not want. Rias made it clear she did not intend to be someone who only produced heirs for a household she could not respect. She spent a few minutes reading through the basic information in the folder and then took it with her when she left. Later, Matsuda and Motohama found Issei at his desk looking exhausted. Matsuda observed that he seemed like he was about to pass out. Issei insisted he was fine, but his friends did not look convinced. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed the long night he had just endured. Issei had not meant to stay up all night, but circumstances at home had demanded his attention. He had returned to find his apartment covered in frost and a deeper chill upstairs. There, face down on his bed and quietly sobbing, was Seraphal Leviathan. She was more than a friend to him, but politics and rules set by Graphia placed limits on what could be allowed between the Devil Kings, which was frustrating to him. He had not pressed for explanations. Instead, he had simply gathered Seraphal into his arms to comfort her. Shivering from the effects of her own power, she had clung to him tightly. He remembered the small, icy tears on her cheeks and how helpless she had seemed. That moment had stayed with him. For a time after, His thoughts drifted, and when he came back to himself the sun was setting and he was outside, not near the school. He had clearly lost track of how long he had been gone. Turning toward a voice that had called his name, he nearly stumbled from vertigo. The figure before him was a young woman dressed mostly in black with hints of red and green. The setting sun behind her threw everything into an orange glow, making it hard for him to see her features clearly. The intense light only made things worse. Issei would have preferred to keep sleepwalking through the day for now. He yawned, a drawn-out yawn that would have impressed Drake, and tried to rub his eyes into functional focus. A pounding behind his skull grated on his nerves, but the core of Issei's being still reacted with delight at what he could finally see. Even as his eyelids fought to stay open, his gaze traveled from the ground upward. He took in brown shoes, white calf-high socks with a red stripe, a dark green skirt a bit longer than Kuoa's, and a deep red jacket that accentuated a figure that looked more mature than expected. She held a briefcase at her side. Her facial features were soft and inviting, a nervous smile and violet eyes that made his weary mind latch onto her. A breeze ruffled her waist-length black hair and momentarily obscured one eye. Issei muttered that she could not be from Kuo, because he would have noticed a girl that beautiful before. He was not fully himself. His brain and body were failing to communicate properly, and he did not notice the surprise and blush that crossed her face. He was losing the battle to stay awake and drifted into a half-asleep haze, viewing her as a figment pieced together by an unfocused mind. The girl tried to speak, but Issei was dizzy and barely registering anything. He responded with an affirmative noise before the world tipped instead of merely spinning. A rush of air filled his ears. He stumbled and collided with her, they both lost balance, and then Issei slipped into unconsciousness. After years of trying to gain his attention, Rainier had finally been granted a private moment with him. Her hands had been restless, waiting for any sign that he wanted her, and she had arranged a bold, unmistakable display to capture his notice. When Issei had spoken those few careless words, her hopes of ever forging a closer relationship with Azazel were promptly crushed. It had always been a long shot, and in hindsight she accepted much of the blame. Azazel had never been one to seek war, and any skirmish involving the fallen often left him reclusive for days afterward. Rainier's desperate bid for recognition had led to a brazen attack that she believed would impress him, but it instead cost lives and brought consequences. She had taken out a group consisting of a bishop, 3 pawns, and their king in a shocking daytime strike. The eldest among them had been 20. By some blessing, her face had not been seen, only that a fallen had been responsible. Azazel acknowledged that he did not know what had driven her to act, but he admitted that she had secured his attention. The smirk he wore did not change, yet his eyes revealed a tightly held anger. That anger, and the political calculations of their leader, prevented Azazel from handing her over or executing her immediately. Through careful maneuvering, their leader convinced the devils to let him handle the matter instead. Azazel warned her that she had come perilously close to public execution, a lesson that ushered in a long, tedious decade. Rainier was assigned to observe potential sacred gear users, to confirm their gear and report their dangers up the chain, and then to await orders to act. If a subject did not pose a threat, her tasks were recruitment or surveillance depending on their circumstances. Over 10 years and dozens of missions, only 2 targets had ultimately needed to be eliminated. The latest of these missions came with a very clear subtext. Stay off the devil's radar. Otherwise, they could deal with her as they pleased. Something had happened within the last few months that had made the fallen and the church cautious. A devil of unknown status had managed to infiltrate a church near the Vatican and get away with his body intact. That escape had only been possible because a young woman had healed him. Whatever the endgame for that ploy was, it could not be good. If she was honest with herself, it smelled of a deeper motive. What devil in their right mind would want to get that close to heaven's seat of power in the human world? Vasco Strata was just a call away, and that man embodied the kind of righteous human strength few could match. Now she was in a Japanese suburb scouting a potential high-class sacred gear. If Azazel was right, it might even be a Longinus. She could not afford to mess this up. This needed to be handled precisely and by the book. All she had been given was the name, the school he attended, and the town. Issei Hairu, a second-year student at Kuo Academy in Kuo, Japan. Things grew complicated when she learned the area was under the influence of Rias Gremory and Sona Citri, both younger siblings of a devil king. She had two options. The first was to let the boy go if he became a threat to the devils in the area, destabilizing the balance enough that the fallen could act against other sacred gear users moving between territories. That approach lined up with how she had thought early on in the conflict, but it was risky. The second was to enter quietly, do the job, and get out. The world held devils like Surzex Lucifer, the most powerful devil ever rumored to be far stronger than the original, and Seraphal Leviathan, whose ice magic could freeze entire cities. This mission required discretion. Issei was easy to pick out in a crowd at first glance. Brown hair, light brown eyes that could look golden in certain light, average height. His clothes were usually loose enough to hide his build. She assumed comfort or indifference to appearance. That indifference made her smile inwardly. From the surface, the young man she had been sent to observe seemed unconcerned with others' opinions and spent time with two other boys almost exclusively. But there was something about him that caught her attention. A dopey smile and an easy, lazy stance that suggested a carefree youth. It reminded her of other fallen who had been tasked with close observation. The casual facade was expertly crafted, so few noticed it. She noticed because she used a long-range divination charm and watched him walk toward his apartment building. The carefree look vanished. Where there had been a casual teenager, she now saw a hunter. Something about him was off, and she could not yet determine what. If he had already activated his sacred gear and was aware of the supernatural, he did not show overt hostility toward devils. He observed devils and humans alike. If he had a sacred gear, he was not making it obvious. Over the following days, she caught glimpses of a prowling expression that he quickly masked. Those moments were brief, but they were there. She could sense nothing overtly supernatural from him, which only made the task harder. He spent his after-school hours in a third-floor apartment in a decent building. His parents did not seem to be present in the home, suggesting they lived elsewhere or were not involved in his life. She had not confirmed which. Given his reputation at school, she expected more obvious signs in his room, but the apartment was relatively tidy. He did spend a lot of time online. If he did have a sacred gear, they were known to affect the user in various ways, depending on the gear. When she saw the way a red-headed devil watched him from a nearby window, Rainier knew she had to get a closer look. He had few friends, none of them female, and the girls at Kuo distrusted the three boys because of their intrusive behavior. Rainier needed to get close to determine what sacred gear he might possess and whether it had been activated. An interaction would also reveal his mental state. Rainier decided the best course was to approach him and create an excuse to spend time together, playing the part of a fellow student to get closer and learn more. It had not gone to plan at first. Azazel had contacted her the night before and asked for an update. She had had nothing solid to report. Then she saw Issei walking to school, still looking half asleep. The situation did not improve as the day went on, and she was running out of time. It had to be now. She altered her appearance to look about his age, perhaps a little younger, thinking he might be less likely to question someone who seemed a peer. She took the name Yuma Amano for the guys, and she felt it fit as they met that evening as the sun was setting. He looked dead on his feet, eyes struggling to stay open, stance uneasy, like he could just collapse at any moment. Rainier admitted to herself that she had been caught off guard by his comment about her appearance. He had never seen her before, and she could tell he had not meant to say it. The sleeping mind was more vulnerable, and Issei was practically asleep standing up. Anything he said was likely to be as true as could be. His head seemed disconnected from his body as his eyes roamed over her, but it did not feel like crude ogling. It felt like her entire existence was being measured, which made no sense because there was no power radiating from him. Rainier forced a confident tone and asked him to go out with her, though the forwardness was necessary. Issei answered that he would, barely audible, and she felt a measure of relief. Step 1 was completed. At least she could tell Azazel something. Then Issei passed out on his feet and collapsed into her, and they fell to the ground together. Rainier scolded him for the awkwardness of the situation and held her breath, waiting for some sign that he was all right. He remained out cold. Before she fully realized what she was doing, her fingers found his hair and began to smooth it. The gesture was NTMT but gentle, something she had only offered to a few people before. He was warm enough that it was noticeable through their clothes. With how tired he was, perhaps he was getting sick. The few times she had seen another fallen weaken, their power had dropped dramatically, though even the weakest of them would still register somewhat. Humans were usually affected differently. Rainier paused and closed her eyes, focusing her supernatural senses on Issei. She felt nothing. That absence of any trace of magic was troubling. Even human children gave off some faint sign of energy. For him to give off none was a problem, especially if he had a sacred gear. She forced herself not to panic. If he could suppress himself this well, he might be easier to approach. So far there were no signs he posed a threat. Issei stared at his ceiling, one arm across his torso supporting the other under his chin. The last 24 hours were mostly a blur, only flashes of moments during the school day. He could count the times he'd been this tired on one hand, and they had all come from being pushed into conflict unexpectedly. There had been the time he went camping and was attacked by a rabid werewolf that moved unnaturally fast. There had been the trip to the mall to find a birthday present for Sarah, which had ended with a group of radical magicians holding hostages in a small shop and a late night spent covering the supernatural tracks through the town. And there had been a band of strays scattering across the Astaroth territory. It would have been easier to handle if he had not taken a blow to the knee. He had underestimated how much help Sarah's protective magic would provide. It was not solely directed at Sona. Blank stretches in his memory were out of the ordinary. Manually regulating his body temperature all night had been tedious and more exhausting than he expected, but he had accepted it. Now he just wished he could remember how the scene before him had come to be. A dark-haired woman slept peacefully in his bed in simple sleepwear. He could not recall meeting anyone quite like her the previous day. The Red Dragon Drake spoke up in Issei's mind, saying that Issei should count himself lucky to be alive and that it had been fortunate the Fallen had not realized he was a devil and acted on it. Issei remembered that waking Drake before dawn in the past had earned him a severe scolding. Drake could be cruel when he wanted. Issei had been distracted by her wings when he first saw them, and he realized he should have gone straight to alarm. Drake mentally argued that Issei's reactions were predictably unreliable. Issei ignored the comment in favor of trying to piece together the afternoon that had led to waking with a woman who had wrapped him gently in black feathered wings. The wings had been warm and surprisingly comfortable, like the perfect blanket. Drake noted aloud that Leviathan's influence on Issei must work easily because of how he reacted, but Issei chose to keep focusing on the missing memories. He asked Drake to fill him in, explaining that the day had been a blank besides being exhausted at school, and then nothing. The gap bothered him. Issei had a vague memory of an encounter on the bridge, but the details were unclear. He imagined his death would be cold and swift. He wondered how she had found where he lived. Drake guessed she had been watching him. Fallen angels, he said, usually handled sacred gear users in one of two ways: recruit or eliminate. Issei cursed under his breath at the thought. This meant he would have to tell Sarah, and that worried him. His king and friend had a fierce protective streak that reached for miles when it came to her sister. If something similar had happened with the student council president, war would be inevitable. For others she cared for, the reaction would be less extreme but still serious. If Issei had only been reporting a fallen angel monitoring him, that fallen would be the one to face severe consequences. Unfortunately for him, he'd supposedly agreed to date this woman, and that automatically made him look guilty. He was not about to blame Sarah. She was already on edge and exhausted, and he did not want to make things worse. Drake teased that it had been a pleasure working together and joked about giving a good eulogy at the next host's funeral, then admonished him not to be so dramatic. Issei could feel Drake's mental eye roll, which felt oddly real despite the dragon's lack of a physical form. Drake noted that the fact Issei was still alive likely meant she did not know he was a devil, and he probably had a few days to sort things out. Issei's head hung low. He already knew that, no matter what he came up with lies or results, things would likely be pinned on him. One small comfort was that the door to the underworld was set away from windows and inaccessible to non-devils. If the fallen managed to breach it, all she would see would be a closet with a few board games, coats, and hoodies thrown in for appearances. Ajuka's ingenuity had made the door work clever, a doorknob that concealed its purpose from humans while allowing devils to activate an artificial dimension gate with a turn of the handle, sending them to a predetermined private location. Pulling himself together, Issei glanced at the fallen woman once more and knew he needed a game plan. Drake suggested that Issei take control of Ghost Walker first, since keeping it active all night had been arduous. Hurrying to comply, Issei felt a little guilty about the state he'd been in. Drake's presence remained a familiar, if exasperated, companion. There were reasons, but magical aptitude was not one of them. The control transferred easily because he had been using the trick for so long. Issei mentally thanked his partner and acknowledged that this was not Drake's specialty. Drake observed that he had no need for such things, having had no reason to remain hidden. Issei imagined it must be a relief never to worry about someone discovering what species you were. The whole big red dragon part tended to give him away. Back in the present, Issei thought she probably did not know he was a devil. He could play the clueless normal or the outwardly unaware user. Drake noted that it depended on the reason she was watching. She did not seem a threat now that Issei was conscious, and it was safe to continue the facade of being human if he wished. Issei did not like lying, but orders were orders. They had to lie low until Seraphal said otherwise. At that moment Issei heard movement. Seraphal shifted and stretched as she sat up. Her wings unfolded and nearly brushed the walls. Her expression and gestures held Issei's attention, and he remained still, breathing quietly. Drake sighed and retreated to rest, leaving Issei to handle the situation himself. It had worked out before most of the time, so the odds were in his favor. Seraphal laughed softly, unable to hide her amusement. She should have still been furious. She had been angry enough to cry the other night, but she could not help feeling pleased about how things had gone. Surzex, Ajuka, Falbium, and especially Graphia had been unfair and had not listened to her full request. Seraphal was aware of the role her peerage had taken as anonymous eyes and ears for her and Behemoth, and she could not deny the benefits. Issei understood as well, though his responsibilities were less flexible because of his age. That did not mean he was bad at his tasks, despite what Graphia might think. Seraphal felt guilty about how the night had turned out for two reasons. First, her magic had begun to cool the room to a dangerously low temperature, and Issei had spent that time warming himself while comforting her through the emotional moment. Second, she had intended to keep her promise and more. Earlier impulsive actions had surprised her with how strongly they had affected her. She enjoyed dancing and cared for Issei, and the theatrics of the moment had intensified both their emotions. If someone had asked her beforehand, Seraphal would never have guessed she would be as affected as the one receiving the attention. But that's exactly what happened. It was the looks he gave her, his eyes taking her in with intense attention. She kept the most NTMT memories of those nights private. Back to the important stuff. The way the others dismissed her request was insulting. If they had listened, they would have realized she was not trying to undo any unwritten agreement, but they cut her off the moment she began to speak. Ajuka interrupted, assuming he knew what she intended to say. She had considered telling them about her relationship with Issei a few times. They were her friends and she wanted to share, but something in her gut urged secrecy, and that instinct had proved right. Ajuka warned that if Issei's position and sacred gear were discovered it would subject them to scrutiny with far-reaching consequences, and that he must remain hidden so she could remain safe. Falbium, surprisingly awake and speaking at length, argued that Kateria alone would be difficult to guard against efficiently, not to mention Rizavim and others, and that Issei lacked the situational awareness to protect her alongside Rias and Sona. Moving him discreetly would cost too much time and resources. Surzex added that the families would cry nepotism and that they could not risk the sisters knowing his identity, because they might push him out and leave them vulnerable to future attacks. Graphia was harsher, describing the queen as young, rash, naive, and arrogant, and questioning how his tendencies had not already exposed them. Her words stung. Sarah's heart pounded with a mix of betrayal and anger at seeing her friends demean the person she loved. Grafia continued by warning that his desire for companionship could lead to trouble, whether through pursuing someone with an agenda or through an enemy's interference. She said that monitoring around his home confirmed he must be kept at a certain distance. As she spoke, the temperature in the room dropped. Frost spread across surfaces and a chair cracked from the sudden cold. Everyone looked at Sarah Fall as if she had spoken the insults herself. Sarah's reaction was fierce. She rose from her seat as its leg broke and it toppled sideways, her eyes reflecting the sharp blue of ice. She declared that she had expected better from Surzex and Grafia and that their dismissal of her judgment would end there. She announced that her peerage would no longer accept orders or requests from anyone but herself and that any business involving them would have to go through her first. She vowed to ensure Issei Hairu, ultimate class devil and the strongest queen, would receive what he was owed under their mandates. She warned that, were it otherwise, they would have to explain drastic consequences to Rias. Her declaration echoed in the stunned silence. Before she left, she made one final point. Because they doubted him so much, she would not allow Issei to interfere with a certain engagement, and the woman involved would have to find her own way out. Surzek's eyes flashed crimson in reaction. Grafia showed no immediate remorse, but the flat look on her face satisfied Sarah enough for the moment. When Sarah Fall transported herself to Issei's apartment, the anger that had fueled her storm faded into a deep, aching hurt at having been betrayed by her closest friends. The emotion started as a sniffle and a sting in her eyes, then overwhelmed her. She crossed the room in long strides and collapsed onto his bed, sobbing. Time blurred until she heard a door click and felt footsteps approach, but she could not stop crying. He was there quickly, setting his bag aside and gathering her into his arms. She clung to his uniform jacket, her knuckles chilled with frost. He ran one hand through her hair and rubbed soothing circles on her back. He never asked what was wrong at first, he simply held her until the pain eased. Eventually she drifted to sleep in his lap, comforted by his steady warmth. He murmured reassurances that he would make sure everything would be okay. Those were the last impressions she carried until she woke up just before dawn. Issei had fallen asleep sitting up, his arms still around her. Sarah scanned the room, careful to find and destroy whatever magic had allowed them to spy on her queen. Once she located it, a twitch of her finger dissolved all 6 devices. She had hardly been able to detect them, which meant Ajuka must have been the one to design the magic. She eased herself out of his grip and smiled. It was just like him to offer comfort even when he might feel awkward. With his home clear of prying eyes and ears, Sarah decided to go to the manor where many of their evenings together had taken place. A twirl of her staff and a flash of blue carried her from the human world to a dark room lit by dim bulbs along the back wall. The room was spare bed, medical equipment, a few generic landscape pictures, and a fake tree at the edge of the light. The monitoring beeps were steady as Sarah approached the patient. The girl had long purple hair. The illness was strange and stubborn. Victims slipped into comas. Most died after years, though some survived, Miss LaBelle among them. Sarah thought of the one assigned to guard the patient, Issei. He had the most available free time and his physiology inclined him to want to be there. The sacred gear Nyreed Kyrie made its bearer exceptionally strong in dragon-related powers and connected to the sea. The young woman who possessed it was a Leviathan descendant with a higher level of demonic power and an affinity for water. Because this wing of the manor was tied to those wards, Issei would be alerted first to any breach, and it would be easy for him to leave school and teleport here. Seeing that the girl remained unchanged, Sarah decided it was best to attend to other matters. Now she sat in her private office, spinning in her chair with a light smile. Issei had sent her an impulsive message the day before offering to handle anyone who had upset her. Small gestures like that had clarified for Sarah the role she wanted him to have in her life. He was her best friend, her attendant and protector, her confidant. He kept her grounded when she drifted and helped her up when she stumbled. Issei embodied everything she could think she wanted or needed. She knew he had been involved in embarrassing incidents with friends in the past, but she trusted him. His behavior had since become more controlled. She pushed the rest of her wandering thoughts away and focused on work. If she finished early, she planned to spend time with him later. Rainier felt torn. She had let the moment carry her the peacefulness of someone wrapped in her arms and had fallen asleep with him. In hindsight, leaving after getting him home would have been wiser. Still, it had been the best sleep she had had in a long time. Her worry was twofold. First, she had slept in the bed of someone she had only recently met, which made the morning feel awkward in a way that meant little beyond companionship. Second, she was in her true form, the sensation of stretching wings making that impossible to hide. She had intended to approach him appearing nearer his age and without wings. Now that plan felt compromised. She noticed him standing a few feet from the bed, and a small part of her hoped he would return so they could fall asleep again. Slowly she looked up, bracing for surprise or horror. His gaze fell on her, eyes slightly more open than usual, but his expression was not the shock she had feared. Instead there was stunned, awkward curiosity and a hint of embarrassment. Rainier greeted him in a small, tentative voice, and for a moment his eyes met hers. After that, she did not know what to make of his actions. Issei peered around the room as if expecting something to jump out from a hidden place, though this was his room. Rainier sat there, trying to put two and two together and figure out what on earth he was doing. She even glanced behind the swimsuit posters on his wall before he seemed to calm and face her again. Issei asked what she was, eyes fixed on her as if unraveling a great mystery about her identity, her reasons for being here, and her intentions. Under that intense scrutiny, the same look she had seen the other day, Rainier briefly forgot he was her observation target. He asked if she was part succubus. Her thoughts came to a halt at that absurd question. Pride for her species rose to the surface. She began to explain that she was a full-fledged fallen, but he dismissed her interruption. Then she realized she had his attention, and that he seemed neither confused nor frightened by her non-human status. That checked a box on the list of questions she had about him and made her suspect he had already activated his sacred gear. Now that she thought about it, she wondered if she should be worried being this close to him. If Azazel was right and it was a higher tier, plus this human's ability to completely suppress himself, it spoke of technique and power. He remarked that only a succubus could have such an effect just by waking up. It was stupid and unfair and completely inexplicable, but Rainier had been caught off guard by his comments twice now. She was used to being pursued or admired, even stalked at times, but these completely serious and unintentional compliments were as effective as any pickup line she'd heard. He studied her again, and she reminded herself why this man had remained single. She decided to stay put. If she needed to leave quickly, she could find an excuse. Rainier inhaled to steady herself as the warmth in her cheeks lingered. She started to explain that she was not a succubus and asked rhetorically if she would still be there if she were, but Issei interrupted by suggesting she was a cosplay enthusiast. She was confused why he would think she liked dressing as fictional characters. He elaborated that the black leather outfit seemed like something from a male-oriented series and that he recognized a costume when he saw one, noting that some people wore theirs almost constantly. In a strange way, this off-the-wall conversation was a relief. She was not reporting to a superior and did not have to maintain a line of formal respect. This was not about him being the one she was spying on. She insisted it was not a costume. He apologized and suggested it might be a uniform. She clarified that it was just her clothes and that she liked them because they made her feel confident. His expression shifted from the easygoing look she had seen from a distance to one of compassionate pity, and she bristled. Having a human pity her was not something she needed or wanted. As annoyance began to color her perception, Issei told her she needed to hang out with different people. No way she was not going to let him start ragging on fallen angels. Rainier braced herself for confrontation. Issei continued, saying that if she truly wore the outfit because she liked it, that was fine, but his guess was that she had been infatuated with someone who did not commit, someone with an endless list of short affairs. His opinion was that she had started wearing things like that to get that person's attention. Rainier wondered who this insightful, psychoanalytic person was. He added that the person she desired was of a higher position and that her peers had told her showing more skin was the solution, but the plan had failed. He said that if he had been her friend, he would have told her to ignore those people and that she was gorgeous beautiful in a way that felt unfair to others. He suggested going for a classier look, a slimming dress a shade darker than her eyes, not something revealing, perhaps an ankle-length dress with a side slit to offer the option of showing a bit of leg. He advised pulling her hair back into a ponytail, finding a reason to be near the person she was after, and smiling and having a conversation without any immediate goal. Rainier wanted to leave. She wondered where this advice had been a decade ago. Where was he a decade ago? She remembered he had been just a child then. The idea of receiving relationship advice from a man widely disliked at school made her wince inwardly. Issei waved off the comments, calling himself someone who often got distracted and had a reputation for being a little crude. She raised a brow when he averted his face, catching a flicker of something in his expression before he turned away. He muttered that he did not really know what he was talking about, his voice low enough that most people would have missed it. But a human she was not. Issei's sudden shout startled Rainier, and she jumped at the noise. Issei hurried to the closet, grabbed a few hangers, then moved to the dresser and snatched socks and underwear. He swore as he realized he had never set his alarm and hurriedly explained that the class president would be furious if he was late again. Rainier noted to herself that she had returned him here after he had passed out. They traded no more words as Issei darted about, throwing clothes on while moving from one end of the apartment to the other in search of his coat, bag, and shoes. Once he had everything, he skidded to the door, threw it open, and ran out, leaving the fallen angel alone in his home. Rainier found it odd that he had never even asked her name. The interaction had been strange and unorthodox, but she was not about to look a gift horse in the mouth. She took silent permission to snoop around and catch a little more sleep in a nice bed. Now that she thought about it, the bed was incredibly comfortable and far too expensive for a high school student to own unless he had wealthy family behind him. She did not consider other reasons Issei might possess such items. At the moment she planned to look around more when she woke and then report back to Azazel. She searched thoroughly but had not found anything that revealed the truth about her target. It seemed like a normal young man with a few posters of models in contemporary fashion on his walls. The discovery irritated her because he had managed to unsettle her so quickly. Still, she felt certain something was hidden. She began in the bedroom, because that was where teenagers often kept their secrets. Finding nothing there, she moved to the living room. The arrangement suggested a feminine presence had been frequent. The lighting and decorative accents differed from a stereotypical young man's place. The couch was centered to face the TV, but there were throw pillows, one on each cushion, the middle one red instead of the couch's light brown. A fake plant stood at head level in the corner by the door, and landscape pictures on the walls added color beyond the off-white paint. None of it seemed like Issei alone had set it up. If he had a sister or a mother, maybe this would make sense, but the quality of the items told another story. The blanket draped over the couch was astonishingly soft. From what she knew of human habits, most young men would turn up the heat rather than invest in such decorative comfort. The choices pointed to someone with a taste for finer things, but nothing overtly flashy. He had hidden it well. She moved toward the kitchen, letting her sharp eyes roam. Everything there was clean and orderly, which contrasted with the image of Issei at school as a perverted, single-minded boy. She admitted to herself that she was grasping at straws. The kitchen was the only remaining place to search. The cabinets held keys, boxed foods that were not expired, and other ordinary items. It was too normal, too similar to the average home, but with little subtle additions of higher quality. If she did not already know his age, she might have assumed the place belonged to a man in his 20s with a steady partner who spent the night now and then. That made no sense for a high school student. She opened the fridge hoping to find the clue that would mark him as connected to the supernatural. Inside were milk, juice, bottled water, and a leftover container from a restaurant, its container suggesting a pricier meal than typical takeout. She was still thinking about it when a voice appeared through a magical circle beside her ear and greeted her. Azazel greeted her with a cheerful good morning through the circle. Rainier startled so suddenly that her head struck the freezer handle. She put one hand to her rapidly beating heart and rubbed the back of her head. Azazel commented with amusement that he did not even know what her exclamation had meant and added that the old man never put the dipstick anywhere. Azazel's voice took on a cheeky tone as he remarked that she had been completely ignoring his recommendations. Rainier, who had grown used to his attitude over the years and had long since let go of her infatuation, understood that there had been no chance for Azazel to remain within God's grace and protection. She told him she was not surprised by his behavior. Azazel had a well-known tendency toward crude, irreverent suggestions. He laughed about an old incident when he had sneaked into Gabriel's quarters and surprised him, admitting that he probably should not have mentioned the reason for his visit. Rainier shook her head and returned to her search, her hands moving methodically as she took in each object. Azazel then changed the subject and asked for an update on the kid. Rainier reported that she had made contact with Issei yesterday. The devils were turning their attention to him, so she had kept things low-key. She said they would probably go out sometime soon, which would let her gather more information and get a better read on why he might be suppressing himself to the point of being nearly non-existent. Her mind wandered briefly through an absurd list of condiments as she worked, an odd rhythm to the search that kept her focused. Azazel mused that such suppression was advanced for a human his age unless his sacred gear was the cause. He considered possibilities out loud: a lost dimensional subspecies, a delete field, a trick vanish, and noted that they should have detected something sooner. Rainier continued searching, still convinced she would find nothing. Growing frustrated, Rainier moved to close the fridge, but her fingers brushed a leftover container and it toppled, splattering its contents across the floor. She cursed under her breath at the waste, lamenting the ruined meal. Life as a fallen had taught her to value good cuisine. Azazel returned from his thoughts and asked what had happened. Rainier blinked through the sting in her nose and eyes from the spill. The smell was overwhelmingly spicy, far beyond the normal range. She explained she had been searching Issei's apartment for clues about the supernatural and had accidentally knocked over leftover food. She hoped he had not been looking forward to it and turned the container to read the establishment name in a flowing font. Rainier told him the place was called Idisia's Garden and that the dish had been outrageously spicy. She said she needed to clean up and get some fresh air, worried the smell might linger. Azazel reacted with genuine interest. Rainier flinched. The last time he had sounded like that she had ended up with an obsessive stalker. She remembered how stealthy that person had been and how she had sensed his desperation. The memory of being recruited and then erased from his mind still bothered her. Rainier asked what he meant. After a pause, Azazel explained that Issei appeared well-connected. Idisia's was a VIP, supernatural-only restaurant in San Francisco, and the peppers used there were extremely rare and intense. He recalled waiting months for a reservation once. Rainier said she doubted Issei had managed to get in by himself, and Azazel agreed, wondering who would have either gotten him access or brought the food. He ruled out their people and the angels, leaving the devils, the Shinto, or possibly the Greeks as the most likely contacts. Rainier grabbed paper towels and scooped up what she could, holding her breath as she cleaned the juices from the floor. She observed that, aside from the devils, most factions kept their people within their own areas of control, making direct affiliation unlikely. The Shinto rarely had humans outside shrine attachments, and the area was devil territory. Azazel dismissed the idea of the Greeks being involved with a Japanese kid who lacked any world-famous reputation. Rainier noted that he had deliberately left out the Norse, who were generally more open to outsiders. Rumors persisted that the fallen leader maintained contact with a few Norse gods, though she did not know why. Rainier hoped it would be something productive. The thought also made the strange morning make a little more sense. Rainier suggested carefully that he might not be affiliated with any group. Azazel asked if she had a theory. She hesitated, embarrassed at what had happened, but she knew it could be important. Rainier explained that Issei had passed out and fallen into her the previous day, so she had brought him home and accidentally fallen asleep. She added that her transformation had failed while she slept and he had seen her wings. She noted that, oddly, he had not freaked out and had even called her a cosplay enthusiast. Azazel chuckled quietly. She felt a tick in her brow but continued. Rainier observed that he had managed to analyze her psychologically in minutes, had seen her wings move, and still had not called her out on anything. She described the peculiar look in his eyes when he was alone, as if he were watching for or predicting an enemy. Azazel summarized that Rainier was suggesting a third party had been wiping Issei's memory enough times that the usual effects no longer worked. Rainier confirmed that was her concern. She explained that a mind repeatedly reset would eventually adapt and work around whatever was blocking it, like developing resistance. She had watched him at every opportunity without getting too close and had never seen evidence he knew about the supernatural or a sacred gear, yet this pattern of behavior, being both oblivious and on guard, kept repeating only when he was alone. Rainier added that if someone was still paying such close attention and wiping his memory repeatedly, it indicated care or protectiveness rather than malicious intent. She suggested the possibility that this third party was suppressing aspects of him to keep him safe or out of trouble, even if that plan was starting to unravel as others began to notice him. Azazel asked whether she had searched Issei's entire place. Rainier said that she had, and that the fridge had been the only place she had neglected. She reported that his apartment was unusually clean for a man his age living alone and that some of his belongings looked too high-end to be bought with his apparent means. There were no pictures with other people and no records of an inheritance or family involvement, so she suspected his parents were estranged or deceased. Rainier allowed herself a few more conjectures about the third party's identity, thinking the person was likely female. She reasoned that, given Issei's behavior, someone close to him must have taught him how to interact with women and how to manage on his own. She wondered whether the woman might be a devil, a demigod, or someone affiliated with another faction. The thought that the person could be a devil made Rainier uneasy about future complications. She paused at the implication of how close she felt to Issei and the sudden warmth she noticed in her cheeks. Rainier chastised herself internally, reminding herself this was an assignment, nothing more. Azazel admitted he had not considered that possibility and deferred to her on-the-ground judgment. He acknowledged that if someone had been altering Issei's memory and still kept returning, it likely showed concern. He suggested they might need to cut their losses if things became too risky, since anyone connected to Adesia's was dangerous to make enemies of. He praised Rainier's work and instructed her to finish the job in the next day or two, make sure they were not letting a time bomb slip by, and then return to headquarters. He also mentioned, with a hint that it was a test of social skills, that he had another task coming that would require her interpersonal finesse. Rainier rolled her eyes at his implication that she could present as sweet and kind despite her blunt nature. She recognized his point but found it hard to argue. Azazel went on to explain that the position she was pursuing was a leadership role and that he could not have someone at odds with the Grigori in that spot. He told her to finish the job, report back, and she would then be on track for advancement and a better life. Rainier's eyes widened. She had not expected such an opportunity. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine recognition and glory, but the thought was tempered by caution. Power was never simply handed out. Rainier reminded him that only those with 4 wings could move to mid-rank. She sounded guarded, as if waiting for something to be taken away before it could be real. Azazel responded with a small grin and explained that he had already taken precautions. There was a spot on her lower back that should feel warm to the touch. He described, matter-of-factly, that with a little light on her fingertip the seal could be triggered and her 4 wings would be revealed. He admitted that he had put the seal on her as an insurance policy so she would not act rashly during the punishment she had endured over the last 4 years. Rainier moved through a cycle of emotions: confusion, indignation, relief, and irritation, but beneath it all she felt a sense of forward movement. The path ahead was suddenly clearer. Finish the assignment, uncover more about Issei's mysterious guardian, and return to claim the opportunity that had been offered. She set her resolve to work. Rainier followed Azazel's instruction and felt along her lower back for a slightly warmer spot. Centered just above the waist, a faint warmth matched the dimples at her lower spine. She allowed herself a quiet relief that no one knew about the tattoo idea she had once considered. Poking the spot with a small thread of light produced a sudden rush that clouded her judgment. Rainier told the other person on the line that it had been 10 years, 7 months, and 4 days, her tone scathing despite the danger the voice on the other end represented. Azazel chuckled and said that he had been watching, testing how the power flux would affect her, and that she had mellowed. Issei arrived at school disheveled and only a few minutes after the bell, having pushed his speed a bit more than he should in public. As he neared the gates, he slowed his pace to look like a fit student who had simply been running late. Near the entrance, he noticed Sona and Saji standing close to the building, both flushed and clearly embarrassed. Issei realized something was happening and allowed a victorious grin to surface. He kept moving past them while taking stock. Issei admitted to himself that he could be possessive at times. That side of him reacted strongly when certain people were involved. He knew it and tried to keep it under control. Sona snapped at him for being late, her voice sharp and accusatory. Issei offered a quick smile and explained that he had woken to find an unfamiliar woman in his room and did not remember how she had gotten there. He kept the story as close to the truth as possible, emphasizing his confusion rather than anything suggestive. Saji crossed his arms and told Issei that only someone struggling would fall for him, implying Issei's reputation invited complications. Issei took the remark to heart for a moment but shrugged it off. He did not want unnecessary scrutiny. He reminded Saji that he had not crossed a line and valued personal boundaries. Issei feigned being wounded by the accusation and insisted he had not done anything wrong. Sona retorted that even looking could be inappropriate if the person involved was somewhere private, and Issei realized the coming days would demand careful handling. If he removed temptations and stayed focused, he might be able to manage the fallout from recent events. Issei noticed Keitase and Murayama among the crowd and let the observation pass without comment. Issei insisted that, according to the student code of conduct, he had not done anything wrong. The disbelieving looks leveled at him barely registered. Sona crossed her arms and reminded him that males were not permitted in the girls' locker room, an addendum she had overseen. She held an item of evidence in her hand. Issei replied that if Sona meant last week, he had not been there. Saji stepped forward to defend him, explaining that he had been standing outside the room when the other two had been pulled out. Sona challenged the accusations about invading privacy in the locker room and demanded accountability. Issei said he had read the rules thoroughly before his first year and paraphrased the grievance procedure. Concerns could be submitted in writing to the student council, which would review and forward them to the board, and students would not be reprimanded for raising issues. Sona scoffed that she had read his suggestions and that they tended to focus on altering the dress code rather than solving safety concerns. Issei smirked at her reaction. Sona then stated that she specifically remembered naming 6 locations that provided problematic views into private areas and argued those spots had been left unattended. Issei understood that Sona would now watch his actions closely on campus. He resolved to be careful, keep his senses open, and use his abilities sparingly. He decided that the prudent course was to stay alert and gather information quietly. Sona promised she would review his submitted notes but pointed out his tardiness. She tapped her fingers and announced detention for the day, warning that further lateness would bring longer sentences. Issei saluted playfully and hurried to his class. The rest of the day passed with the usual routine. Teachers lectured, some students were praised for good scores while others were encouraged to do better, and his friends talked in hushed tones about matters they preferred to keep private. At lunch, Issei detected someone watching him who tried to blend into the crowd but clearly took an interest in him. He wondered whether Rias had asked a subordinate to shadow him during school. He thought about Kaneko and how she avoided certain parts of herself after what had happened with her sister. He reflected on having been brought, less than a year after his reincarnation, to the scene of an incident involving a branch member of the Nibirius family. He admitted to feeling on edge at the time when he had wandered the manse like a curious child. What he had discovered there had influenced the leaders to launch their pursuit of a stray bishop. Although that bishop had killed her king, the discovery of recordings and a journal had reframed the case, and her status had been changed from terminate to wanted. Motohama and Matsuda approached Issei at their desk. Motohama leaned in close and told Issei, with obvious excitement, that he had found something they had been searching for. Issei considered warning his friends about the earlier incident, but he remembered their recent comment that he tended to back away from risky situations. He thought about telling them that their behavior could get them into trouble, but he kept quiet to avoid setting off a chain of blame that might fall on him. Issei noticed other students glancing their way, mostly female students who watched warily as was common in the academy. He kept his attention split between the conversation with his friends and the undercurrent of scrutiny that followed him through the day. They knew that the trio was up to no good, or at least discussing things that they would have to be on the lookout for. The few boys in the class exchanged disapproving looks, unhappy that the three were making the girls of the school constantly wary. It made dating more difficult when potential partners were uneasy around any sudden movement. Issei declined to join whatever plan they were plotting, explaining that he had been late and that the student council president would be breathing down his neck for a while. Matsuda and Motohama only smirked, teasing that they would find another way to cause trouble and promising that Issei would hear about it later. Issei held up his hand to stop them, warning that he did not want to be the reason anything got shut down the first time it happened. Drake, silently present as ever, advised against any scheme that would invade the girl's privacy. Issei bristled at the caution but acknowledged the point. He confessed inwardly that he hoped one day a committed relationship might temper some of his less mature impulses. Drake let out a resigned sigh at that, still trying to steer him toward better choices even if he rarely managed to change his mind. Issei thought that his chances with Serafall were slim without some help from powerful allies. Graphia's dislike for him, for reasons both fair and petty in his view, made support from Surzek's unlikely. Motohama, touched by Issei's restraint, told him he was a true friend for looking out for the group, and Issei simply shrugged with a wry smile, saying that friends were supposed to have each other's backs. Serafall, meanwhile, second-guessed whether today was the right moment. She checked her appearance one last time, ensuring the glamour she had prepared presented her as a composed, mature woman who might catch Issei by surprise in the best possible way. Her hair was a deep blue, loose around her shoulders, and her attire was professional and understated. Her eyes remained the same, offering the contrast that completed the image she intended to project. In her hand she carried a dark wooden box lined with velvet that contained 15 chess pieces pulsing faintly with demonic power, and a rolled parchment sealed with the mark of the Leviathan. This was the gift she believed Issei had long deserved, the land that would make his position secure. She had agreed never to teleport into his apartment unannounced, out of respect for human privacy and the possibility of others being present. She arrived instead in a paid, closed-off room reserved to protect her anonymity. As she walked from the rented room toward the stairs, her mind drifted to practical matters they would need to discuss between them. She acknowledged that the cultural norms around relationships among devils meant she could not expect everything to be simple, and she worried about the day his attention might be drawn elsewhere. She also recognized her own limitations and thought that some practical support might be sensible. She pulled a key from her pocket, slid it into his door's lock, and turned it. The click of the door sounded foreboding as it echoed down the empty hall. The knob turned easily, and the doorway opened into a small foyer that led to the kitchen, living room, and bedroom. Sarah stepped inside and felt a familiar shiver and awareness that someone nearby wielded something especially potent against devils. Light. A faint scent like perfume and a deliberate air of allure lingered in the apartment, marking the presence of a fallen. Thinking quickly, Sarah scanned the rooms. Nothing appeared damaged. Whoever had been here had not fought inside. If a fight had taken place, Issei would have contacted her. Sarah suspected there was more behind this. Fallen did not normally enter devil territory. Azazel had been checking on sacred gear users, so perhaps Issei was suspected of possessing one. To risk coming to this home, Azazel or his subordinate must have believed something important was at stake, or perhaps Azazel trusted the subordinate more than expected. Surzek had mentioned Rias saying something along those lines not long ago. Sarah announced that she knew someone was there and hoped the person kept a level head. The evil pieces and land deed vanished in a flourish of blue light. She would turn them over later. Her steps were deliberate as she moved through the apartment, eyes searching for anything out of place. When a smooth, sultry female voice responded from the living room, Sarah blinked in surprise at the unexpected answer. The fallen introduced herself as having brought Issei something called idijas and warned that Issei had an unusually high tolerance for spicy food. Sarah noted the practical observation and moved past the kitchen. The fallen asked whether this would be one of those encounters that stayed polite until eye contact sparked a fight. Sarah said she would prefer to avoid damaging Issei's apartment. The fallen agreed, and the tone relaxed slightly. The woman's honesty eased Sarah's guard, though she remained cautious. Peace talks among devils, fallen, and angels were still in their early stages, and Issei had not been told. Only Graphia among the Satan's peerage knew. That made the fallen's presence all the stranger. Sarah rounded the corner into the living room, where the ceiling vaulted into large windows. On the couch, a figure with long dark hair sat with the television low on a home improvement program and half-finished nail polish. The fallen looked up from painting her nails. One hand and one foot were already done. Her face was flawless, and her violet eyes were clear and piercing. The fallen explained she was sprucing herself up to ask Issei out. Walking around the couch, Sarah took in the woman's appearance and the faint magical shimmer around her that betrayed an enchantment. She looked striking with long black hair, violet eyes, and an elegant posture altered by magic, but plainly crafted to impress. Sarah admitted she might have recommended a color closer to Sarah's eye shade, but the fallen said the current color was all she had at the moment and that Issei would probably like it. The fallen then revealed she had met Issei the previous day on the bridge and had asked him out, but he had been so out of it that she doubted he remembered. Sarah suppressed a wince at the thought. The circumstances that had left Issei in that state were dangerous. Sarah remembered a private, quiet moment with Issei in this room and allowed herself a brief, neutral recollection of what had happened here. She introduced herself as Sarah and explained that she and Issei had been friends for a long time. She added that, human or otherwise, it was good to see someone else show interest in him. The fallen, who gave her name as Rainier, seemed candid and surprisingly forthcoming. Rainier nodded when Sarah suggested that the situation made sense given the location, though she sounded slightly disappointed. Sarah asked if Rainier planned to hurt Issei. Rainier shook her head to indicate she had no intention of doing so. Sarah accepted that answer and remarked that, while their people would likely view the situation as problematic, the journey for love did not always follow rigid standards. The memory of Cleria Belial and her relationship with an exorcist came to mind as an example of how things between their groups had already been complicated. The two women sat in the quiet apartment, each measuring the other, aware that this unexpected encounter might become a small step in the larger, uneasy process of building trust between their worlds. It would have happened differently under her watch. Sarah thought that she would not use the word love, but she admitted that he had a way of working his way into a girl's head. Rainier warned that this was how it began. A few words that caught someone off guard, attention that turned to careful treatment and flattery until it was too late and the person was deeply attached. Sarah had to withhold a smile at the truth of it. When Rainier asked, with a wry edge, whether there was any danger of him losing control of whatever power he possessed and harming others, Sarah replied that Issei was no danger to anyone. She knew the truth that he could be devastating if pushed, but she also trusted that Drake would not allow such a thing. Rainier accepted that and said she would be gone in a few days, needing only to finish her report. Rainier challenged Sarah's confidence about Issei's future behavior, noting that leaving did not necessarily mean she would not return. Sarah answered that as long as Issei was treated well while she was away and honesty was maintained without courting trouble, the length of Rainier's stay did not matter. Rainier laughed softly, her purple eyes bright with amusement, and made a teasing remark about the arrangement. Sarah's smile tightened. She explained that social realities and the perceptions of her circle constrained how openly she could be involved with Issei. What mattered, she said, was Issei's happiness and the moments they could actually spend together. She wanted him to be free to make his own choices. Rainier registered this and, after a moment of curiosity about Issei's reputation at school, let the topic drop. Sarah considered whether Rainier should mention their meeting in Issei's apartment. She preferred it remain unspoken, having intended to surprise him, and asked Rainier not to reveal their encounter. Rainier smirked at the implied suggestion and promised discretion. Rainier explained that recruitment had been off the table the moment she saw the food from Adesia's, and apologetically mentioned that she had accidentally knocked some out of the fridge. Sarah used the silence that followed to reflect. Sarah should have been upset that Issei had come into contact with a fallen without telling her immediately, and she should have been angry with herself for allowing it to happen. Instead, she felt a guarded pride. Issei had managed to host a fallen in his home without revealing the visitor's true nature. He had stayed composed and raised no obvious alarms. That was an achievement. The situation was an opportunity. Issei's success could be leveraged to grant him greater freedom and to advance peace between the three factions. It would be a slow process, with obstacles and unexpected turns, but it was possible. All that needed to happen was for this fallen angel to come to regard the queen favorably. Sarah believed Issei could inspire that, given the chance. Rainer's earlier observation suggested it might not take much. Sarah decided that Rainer should keep their meeting quiet. She trusted that Issei would be apologetic already. With that settled, she left, regretting that her schedule would not allow her to keep a promise to him that night. Surzex, unusually distressed, called after her. He pleaded with Sarah, imploring her not to proceed in a way that would cause more harm. His appearance betrayed him, his usual immaculate composure slightly frayed, a few strands of hair out of place enough for Sarah to know his concern was sincere. Surzex told her that her peers had overstepped and that the consequences could not be allowed to fall unfairly on others. He asked whether she would have Rias bear the cost of their mistake. Sarah recognized the Baal temper in his tone and recalled that Venerana, the most composed of the family, had passed down a similar control to her son. Zikram maintained an exterior of calm authority, but Sarah noticed subtle tells that betrayed their shared tension. The situation remained tense, and Sarah felt the weight of responsibility press on her. She turned from the window and prepared to navigate the consequences of actions taken in the shadows, determined to protect those she cared for and to steer events toward a peaceful outcome. There was always a sign. Aquamarine. Eyes swirled in frustration, but she refused to give in, not when it came to this subject. Sarah Fall challenged Surzex, asking how many opportunities he had let slip by and how many alternatives he had to get Rias out of that engagement. She accused him of failing to act, insisting that Surzex and Grafia had every chance to save Rias from what they saw as a terrible fate. Sarah Fall pointed out that Reiser was unpleasant and unlikely to love Rias as she wished, but he would not abuse her with Surzex watching. It would be suicide for the third son of the Phoenix family. There was also something else bothering her that Sarah Fall thought should have been addressed long before now: Grafia's hostility toward the queen. Sarah Fall said she could understand being miffed about strength or prestige, but Grafia's tone had been more than a bruised ego. Surzex remained silent, staring at her with a tense gaze. Sarah Fall declared that silence unacceptable and decided not to let herself be worked up. She had more productive things to do, like preparing for the conversation Issei would likely have about the fallen angel she had met earlier that day. Sarah Fall described the woman as honest and open-minded, a rare trait between the species, and thought it best to wait before contacting Azazel. Letting others know that Rainer had met the Queen of the Leviathan could not be openly announced, but the situation could be reported in another way to achieve the same effect. The possibility of peace opened many doors. Her peerage watched most factions, and if the fallen and angels were at peace, that would change many dynamics. Sarah Fall reminded Surzex that he should have trusted her as she trusted him, admitting she disliked maintaining a stern posture when her job was more enjoyable with laughter and levity. Surzex finally released a large sigh, and the anger in his expression faded. He asked what she had wanted to say back in the meeting, sounding more like himself again. Sarah Fall answered that she had already taken care of it. The pieces and land had been issued discreetly. She explained that making Issei recognized as her queen did not mean trampling statutes. Rias and Sona would be displaced as holders of Kuo only under the established rules. If they wanted to contest it, they would have to do so through a rating game or an exam on the area in question. Either way, Sarah Fall believed Issei would prevail if the girls teamed up against him. The match would last only as long as Issei chose to hold back, and in an exam he would excel because he had lived there his entire life. Surzex apologized for what had been said earlier, acknowledging that they trusted Sarah Fall's judgment despite finding Issei an unconventional choice. He admitted he and others had expected Sarah Fall to favor an idol who dabbled in spirit cleansing, but conceded that he could not call Sarah Fall's choice wrong given Issei's accomplishments, such as defeating Grafia at 14. Sarah Fall reflected on how she had met Issei. It had been by chance in a park under the control of a powerful underworld family. Cleria had been a friend who did not mind Sarah Fall visiting to get away. The boy had been swinging a stick at a tree, clearly upset, and he needed a friend in that moment. She needed a distraction. She had noticed the red-rimmed eyes and understood his pain, and she resolved to set aside time for his mother's birthday and arrange an excused absence from classes. Surzex observed that there were too many ways for things to go wrong, and that experience was the best tutor for keeping things together. That experience could only come with time. Serafal responded with a hint of anger, asking who had placed so many responsibilities on him. She answered her own question. They had. She named Surzex, herself, Ajuka, and Falbium as the ones who had done so. Sarah reminded Surzex that they had made him swear to secrecy when he went to school with their sisters after Kuo was handed over. Falbium and Ajuka had put Ingvild in his care. They had all pushed him to be more than he felt ready for, and he had adjusted as best he could. A 17-year-old former human should not have the power he did. It had corrupted hundreds of pure-blooded supernatural beings, and yet he remained the same gentle soul Sarah had met nearly 10 years ago. She insisted to Surzex that he was better than any of them were willing to admit. For a few moments Surzex looked as if he might concede her point. Then his expression shifted and his eyes searched hers until he reached a quiet conclusion. Surzex observed that she loved him. Sarah did not deny it. She braced herself, expecting a lecture about the harem law, but Surzex surprised her. He told her he was happy for her. The smile he gave was not the formal one he used in public. It was the warm, familiar smile from their youth, the one that predated the burdens of war and rulership. Surzex asked how many times he had managed to convince her to do something. Sarah scoffed at the impossibility of counting. After a beat, she conceded that he had succeeded once. When she considered stepping aside for Graphia to be named Leviathan, he had convinced her not to. He admitted then that his motives had not been purely political. He had not wanted Graphia overwhelmed with work because he wanted time with her. If he intended to marry her, he needed strong opposition for the role, and there had been only one person already interested. Sarah laughed softly and acknowledged that it had been for love. Surzex apologized for how they had presented themselves at the meeting and set aside his other objections. He recognized that the chances of Sarah being coerced were negligible, and as long as she did not prove him wrong, the others could not legitimately refute any relationship she chose to have. Sarah pressed on with the question that had been bothering her. Why Graphia seemed to hate him so much. She already knew the obvious points. Issei was not a pure-blooded devil like the queen's spouses. He was unusually young for a role that dealt with deep matters of their society, and his attitude was less formal than expected, but Graphia's anger at the meeting suggested something more personal. Surzex confessed he did not know the specifics. He only knew that after a conversation some time ago, Graphia had stopped trusting Issei. It had to be personal. He had never seen her that angry before. Sarah remembered that day with more clarity now. She, Graphia, Behemoth and Musashi had been helping train him for several days. During a lesson, Graphia had unexpectedly lost her temper and walked away, and she had avoided being near him ever since. A year later, when each queen was required to spar against him, Graphia had not started cautiously like the others. She had gone all out from the beginning. After an hour of an intense duel that left the artificial training dimension badly damaged, a new strongest queen had been declared. His detention had gone largely as expected, except for an awkward visit from Aika while he cleaned the entire building. She told crude, offensive jokes that made Issei uncomfortable. Some of the material crossed a line for him, especially jokes that touched on inappropriate subjects or involved minors. He made it clear he refused to engage with anything like that. Although the interaction made the time pass faster, it left a sour taste, and he kept his focus on finishing the work. A message arrived informing him that the Fallen was still in his home. Issei looked up as the building came into view, pulling himself away from the unpleasant after-school conversation. The thought of Aika's vulgar humor lingered, but he pushed it aside and readied himself for what awaited at home. He had been tricked into watching it once and vowed never to again. Draig urged him to focus, and Issei grumbled that he would calm down. He breathed deeply to clear his thoughts of Aika and whatever strange taste she might have. Issei muttered that if they ever encountered a furry they would deal with it harshly, then steered the conversation back to the matter at hand. Why was she still here? He had expected her to slip away and meet him on the bridge another day. Keeping Kaneko, his small cat-like shadow, in mind, Issei hoped the fallen angel was merely disguised. He could not sense anything hostile from this distance, but that did not rule out the possibility that she was hiding herself. He thought about how long it had taken him to make Ghost Walker second nature and doubted she had that level of training. Drake complained when Issei let his thoughts wander, and Issei chastised himself for getting distracted. Issei decided to handle the situation step by step. He could not detect any negative aura, so he assumed she was playing coy or putting on an act. Drake found it odd that she had given up revealing her true nature earlier that morning, and Issei shrugged, noting that no one was at their best right after waking. The apartment building was generic: white walls, mailboxes, and flyers. Issei kept checking the mailbox for 3B out of habit, more to appear normal than from expectation, and was surprised to find a small slip of paper tucked inside. It looked like a street flyer, but there was something else about it. Issei felt the faint tingle of magic emanating from the paper. It could only be a summoning flyer, and he remembered overhearing Rias Gremory mention his name in Sona's office. The flowing black script and a red Celtic rose marked the sender clearly enough: a Gremory seal. Issei wondered whether Sona had kept their conversation from Rias. He felt a flicker of wounded pride at the thought that he might be seen as desperate. He reminded himself that some arrangements were costly and complicated, and a few past stories he had heard from others had made him uncomfortable. He had once made an ill-advised comment out of curiosity as a teenager, and some of the tales he had been told later left him uneasy. Drake, unsurprisingly, used those memories to tease him. Issei climbed the stairs with a lingering sense that Drake would use this against him later. He almost forgot about the fallen angel waiting in his apartment until he reached his door and checked whether she had locked it. She had, which suggested she had thought through even minor details. Issei noted that pretending to be an ordinary young woman required a different set of precautions, and leaving the door unlocked would have been careless. He paused to consider how to approach the conversation, then prepared himself to enter. Issei had seen her wings but pretended to be an oblivious human. He assumed she had changed by now. The memory lingered. The key clicked and the door opened, and he pushed it as if he expected to be home alone. As soon as the door closed, his oversensitive nose was nearly overwhelmed by magically charged pheromones. The movement of air inside the school made such things easier to ignore, given the number of humans compared to devils, but this fallen had been in his house all day and there were no windows open. She had filled the place with a subtle, otherworldly scent that made people more pliable to her will. Issei's comparison of her to a succubus felt warranted. Devils could use a similar pheromone trick, but usually only deliberately. Fallen were known to employ whatever means they had to get what they wanted. Angels might be the weakest faction in numbers and versatility, but Fallen were the weakest in global influence. An old digital voice from the living room announced a taunt, reminding Issei of the Sega Genesis sound bites he used to hear. He remembered late nights playing difficult games from a time when titles were unforgiving rather than hand-holding. Drake warned Issei, asking if he was concerned that she had been snooping around. Issei scoffed and thought he was not really worried. He noted a few old magazines in the closet but expected she would not be surprised by them. He also reminded himself that he kept nothing devil-related in the apartment. He had not opened those magazines in years, with the internet now overflowing with other sources, and he wondered whether, if he had never been exposed to the supernatural, those finds would have mattered to him. If Sarah had never come into his life, he would not have had time to think about dating. After public school finished, he would need to go to work. Even with a meager income, anything beyond the bare necessities would be out of the question. Sometimes life was cruel to those who did not deserve it. From the living room came a string of curses about disembodied heads. Rainier was clearly deep in a retro game on his old Sega. She was hunched over the controller, tongue peeking from her mouth, violet eyes set in determination to beat the boss, a living pile of dirt-throwing disembodied heads. Issei glanced at the screen and understood her trouble. This was level 1, where the character turned into a werewolf after collecting 3 orbs dropped by blue pigs. The rate at which the heads fell made it difficult to move and attack the boss at the same time, though there were a couple of safe spots that made the fight easier. Drake reminded Issei not to let his guard down. She might still be out to kill him. Issei acknowledged the warning and assured himself he would be careful. Deciding he should probably help rather than let her lose a life, Issei let her know he was home and advised her to step forward 2 paces. The next few heads could not hit her there. Rainier glanced up in surprise, then returned to the screen and followed his advice. She kept attacking and finished the boss without needing to move, suggesting she had been stuck on that fight for a while. Issei noted that if she did not like that boss, she should avoid Conquer's Bad Fur Day. He remarked that one of its bosses was memorably outrageous and smiled at her scrunched face. Rainier paused the game between levels and wondered how something like that had passed a review board. He took in subtle details about her. She had reverted to the younger version he had first met. He preferred when she let her hair down. The way her bangs occasionally obscured one eye gave her an air of mystery that made him want to brush them away to see her eyes clearly. He reminded himself to focus and to be respectful. The blue polish on her nails caught his eye. The fallen Yuma, he believed Drake had said her name, was leaned back on the couch to stretch. She sat comfortably, and Issei noticed her painted toes and the way she extended her arms behind her head in a more exaggerated stretch than that morning. Yuma leaned back and made a quiet, contented sound. Issei told himself he could not get too distracted. He spoke about a quirky game, explaining that the main character was an alcoholic squirrel and that at one point the player fought cartoonish enemy bears. He noted that it was one of the few Nintendo 64 titles with a mature rating. Talking about games was a decent way for him to keep his mind from wandering. He thought her voice was remarkable. When her disguised tones slipped, it lost its peppy youth and took on a lower, more textured quality. She straightened up and crossed her legs, and he noticed a bright movement out of the corner of his eye. He saw her tiny smirk and the shimmer in her violet eyes when both opened. Issei thought the game sounded unique. He felt uncertain about where to take the conversation next. He wondered whether he should mention the state he had seen her in that morning, or point out that she was still in his home, or ask why she had not gone to school. He worried that if she had gone to school, she might have left his apartment unlocked. Yuma asked if something was on his mind. Issei answered that he was not much of a morning person and that whatever small filter he had was usually gone until about 10. Yuma quirked an eyebrow and asked about this morning. He admitted that he had not been in the best state on the bridge but believed the important memories had returned, and Drake had filled in the rest. Yuma noted that he did remember her name, and Issei confirmed that he did. Yuma asked whether the things he had said earlier were simply the unrestrained truth as he saw it. Issei acknowledged that he did not like to lie and that his honesty had not helped his reputation at school. Yuma laughed and mentioned his friend's tendency to peeping. Issei defended those friends as honest but rueful about how their behavior would give them little chance at normal relationships unless they changed. Yuma said she would dress more conservatively if she ever met them, and then asked if he wanted to go out. Issei admitted he liked the idea. Meeting his friends would at least allow them to spend time together and have something more than something casual. He reflected that normal had not been part of his life for a long time. Issei reminded her that they had already talked about this on the bridge, but he was enjoying the conversation. Yuma stood and walked toward him. She reached him and put her hands on his jacket in a brief, friendly hug. He looked down to meet her eyes. He was not very tall, and standing close made him feel unexpectedly small. Yuma explained that she meant to go into town together to get to know each other, have some fun, and grab something to eat, typical date things. She widened her eyes to appear innocent. They stood close enough for their proximity to be obvious, and then Issei told her he would just set his things down and they would head out. The outing went smoothly. Rainier had not expected much when she had suggested it so suddenly, but as they walked through town and stopped in a few shops, things felt comfortable. Issei surprised her by taking the initiative to hold her hand, and she responded by lacing their fingers. Together, he felt warm and steady, like sitting near a fireplace on a cold night. She admitted she had been unsure how things would go when he returned from school and had been annoyed when he arrived later than she expected. He explained that he had been a few seconds late entering the school grounds and had received detention from the student council president, who had warned that they would be watching him. Rainier interpreted that as more than simple oversight, The devils were paying closer attention now, a fact made clear when he placed a summoning flyer on the counter with his bag. She tried to remember the name of the devil he had met. Some S named Sarah, Stella, Skylar, Samantha. She was sure it began with an S. Rainier was not very concerned. The woman had shown only minimal power, and Rainier assumed she came from a more progressive, lower-ranking family for associating with a human like Issei. Issei recalled that the she-devil had described gold as pure and brilliant. Despite everything, Issei's tendency to notice certain things left no doubt in anyone's mind that he was, by his own admission, a pervert. But that devil had obviously seen something that nobody else had, and Rainier was starting to catch a glimpse of it. While they were in a shop crowded with clothes, media, and jewelry, Issei slipped away for a few minutes while Rainier looked at shoes. She did not question why he walked off. She assumed he would be back soon and that he probably just had to use the restroom. She was wrong. Issei returned with a necklace on a simple silver chain. It was not extravagant, but the diamond-shaped gem in the center was pretty, the color of indigo between blue and purple. Rainier tried to play it off, telling Issei she could not accept it and that he must need the money for something more important. He glanced from her hands to her eyes and then to the necklace, and he noted that he thought she would like it and that it matched her eyes and her taste. Her heart reacted in a way she could not name. No one had ever bought her anything that felt like more than a show of wealth or something meaningless. The gesture alone made her smile in a way she had not felt in years. Rainier insisted again that it was beautiful but she could not keep it and that he should return it and save the money. Issei looked into her eyes for a long moment and then turned to the man at the register and asked about the return policy for jewelry. The man answered that items could be returned within 14 days with a receipt. Issei reached into his pocket, took out the long proof of purchase, folded it several times, smiled at Rainier, and then tore it to shreds. The employee snorted a laugh, but Rainier did not care. Her breath hitched as if the world had shifted. Issei held up the necklace, showing that he did not have the paperwork to get his money back. A dizzy, giddy feeling swept through Rainier. She relented with the most honest smile she had felt in decades, turned, and pulled her hair aside to allow him to fasten the chain around her neck. Nearby, other shoppers looked on, some with envy, others pretending not to notice. Rainier felt a small, private thrill of satisfaction. For a moment she wanted to kiss him, but she forced herself to resist. Getting too attached was something she could not allow, and Issei was already making that difficult. She had not expected to enjoy the evening so much, yet Issei was interesting, a puzzle she wanted to understand completely. If he continued to be like this, she told herself she might break her own rules. She also noted that the only people whose lies she could not read were those whose names she would recognize, and there had been no supernatural signal that would have alerted Azazel. That made her believe he was not luring her into a trap. Rainier thanked him quietly, her blush genuine, and they left the store hand in hand. They grew hungry and planned to find dinner, but Issei led them on a detour, saying there was something he wanted her to see first. By the time they reached it, the sun had nearly set and the sound of water guided them along a pleasant forest path. When the trees opened, a calm lake lay before them, reflecting the changing colors of the sky. The remaining orange light seemed to float on the surface, as if the sun were directly ahead, and the sky above faded into the deep blue that matched the necklace. Issei called the view heaven's evening days and gently guided her to tilt her head. It surprised Rainier. She had not expected him to care for landscapes. They had spoken about many things while walking through town: hobbies, favorite foods, music, games, movies, sports, friends, but this had not come up. He smiled toward her and explained that the first thing he remembered about meeting her was the way the sun had been setting behind her. Orange, black, and purple had been the only things he could recognize for a moment, and he had thought the colors were beautiful. Rainier scolded herself inwardly for blushing, but she could not look away from how the light fell in his eyes. They seemed almost golden. He told her he used to come to the lake often as a child and that it held many memories. He scratched the back of his head with the hand she did not hold and smiled. He said he did not think this place would ever be associated with anything other than her now. Rainier panicked inwardly, thinking he should stop talking before she did something rash, like walking away. She could not understand how he could shift her mood so completely, one moment infuriating, the next making her heart race as if it had been kicked. The warmth she saw in him felt like gold, bright and impossible to ignore. She reminded herself that he was too good for her in a way that made her uneasy. He had even gone so far as to kill in the past to gain recognition. That knowledge complicated every feeling she had for him. Someone who lied as easily as she breathed. Did not want to say it, but felt it had to be said, and she did not like the way his expression shifted. He paused for a long moment, gathering himself, and then admitted that he was not the kind of guy who ended up with the girl. He laughed softly and added that if anyone from his school saw them together, they would assume he had forced her to stand that close. He let go of her hand, and the warmth disappeared as if she had been taken from a fireplace and plunged into cold water. Only then did she notice how utterly alone they were, with no one on the water's edge and nothing within the reach of her keen hearing. They were isolated from the rest of the world, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. He acknowledged that they had only met the day before and that the morning had not started well. Rainier could not argue, though she felt a fierce desire to. Her eyes darted around, searching for anything else to focus on. He pointed out how much they did not know about each other, and the observation felt aimed squarely at her. The remark put her further on edge. Around them were sand, grass, trees, water, and sunlight. If she were the person she once had been, this would have been the perfect place to strike for glory. And she knew it had all been arranged by him. She suspected a trick, a dare, some kind of prank. Her mind supplied the word mission without consent. He told her she had won and could go back and brag that she got the pervy loser to like her in 24 hours. The emphasis stung. A smile flitted across her face and then fell away. Issei had felt that something was off from the start. She should have taken his predatory glances at the surroundings more seriously, especially after how he had scrutinized her that morning. She wondered whether he had truly left her alone in his apartment on purpose or whether it was a ploy to make her flee. He had noticed a shy voice on the bridge that did not match the woman he was now facing. He described her as confident, determined, somewhat hot-headed, and maybe a touch romantic. She realized she had made a grave mistake and felt it keenly. He turned to face her, his smile guarded and uneasy, a change she could feel but not fully understand. He told her he liked her and then stepped back, creating a distance that pained her. Rainier tried to speak but her mouth was dry and words failed her. He said that she had hooked him faster than others had. A flare of anger rose inside her at the thought that someone had hurt him, but she forced herself to rein it in once she realized how far her thoughts had gone. He invited her to sneer and mock as she pleased and then to walk away and return to their ordinary lives. He offered a way out without questions. She knew saying it had all been a ruse would be the right, safe choice. She had answers for Azazel. Issei was not a threat, not recruitment material, no asset for the fallen. Walking away would spare everyone trouble. But even considering it brought the sharp, painful ache. Rainier touched the necklace he had given her and felt 1,000 scenarios race through her mind. She wondered whether he knew the blue-haired woman was a devil, and if he knew she was a fallen angel, how would he feel? If they had been in an official relationship, the woman would have said so. Enough, she told herself. It might be the wrong decision, it might end poorly, but it was hers to make. Rainier closed the few steps between them and cupped each side of his face, noticing that the guarded expression softened. She told him that everyone had secrets and reasons, but she was not there to hurt him. Before he could answer, she leaned in and rested her forehead against his in a brief, tender gesture. The contact was gentle and filled her with an unexpected warmth and lightness she had never anticipated. He returned the gesture, placing his hands at her sides and holding her close in a comforting, non-graphic embrace. It was a quiet, honest moment, and surrendering to it felt right in a way she could not explain. Issei later held the door open for her and gestured for her to enter first. Yuma smirked as she passed, teasing that he must be opening doors just to look at her. He admitted that chivalry came with perks. She laughed and deliberately emphasized her walk in a playful, teasing manner. Issei's inner voice, Drake, warned that he was playing with fire. Issei answered himself, acknowledging that he liked her and that he had given her every chance to kill or recruit him. He had been as open as he could be without disobeying Sarah's orders. Drake asked how he expected the king to receive this information, and Issei admitted he could not have her in the way he wanted. Only occasional time together would ever be possible. He asked whether he did not deserve a chance to be happy. Drake countered that secrets like this would come out and predicted it would not be pleasant. Issei hoped he could find some old-fashioned solution, some treaty logic to smooth things over. Yuma suggested that if things reached that point without being discovered, they could secure peace through a marriage arrangement. Drake mentally dismissed the idea, warning Issei that such matters would not remain hidden for long. Issei stopped listening and watched as Yuma scanned the menu. The side of her he had seen today held him. He had given her a chance as much for her as for himself. Her swearing, her teasing, and the way she tried to hide a blush were all captivating. He suspected that Yuma was not her real name. It felt too perfect for a chance meeting on a bridge at sunset. Still, the girl he'd seen was real. She had admitted that they all had secrets. It was only a matter of time before those secrets came out. They all had secrets. Some were more surprising than others. On any other day, Issei would have been irritated that Aika was bothering him again, but last night had gone well, so he kept his temper. The cafeteria was oddly empty, which made conversations carry across the room. Aika asked why he was there as she smirked, and Issei settled back in his chair, arms crossed, noting how the new building made voices echo from one corner to the other. He thought that talking with Aika always hit a point where something was said you did not want others to hear, so the classroom was usually the safest place to speak with her. Drake warned Issei mentally that his dreams that night would be unpleasant, and Issei felt his hand twitch at the threat. Drake would have preferred that Issei walk away and not engage, but the dragon soon withdrew, leaving Issei to brace himself for whatever sensations his partner might inflict in the night. Aika asked if he objected to her having lunch with a classmate, the smirk contradicting her innocent tone. Issei replied that it was fine, but noted that apart from yesterday their only conversations had been when she took on a superior air with him and the others. Aika laughed softly, as if enjoying a private game that some players had not even noticed had begun, from someone with her sharp mind, that was potentially dangerous. Aika objected to being painted as a repeating villain with a new monologue each time. Issei compared her to an Act 2 boss in a game, someone who showed up often, stuck around until a certain threshold was met, then left only to return and annoy them another day. She raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms, and Issei, without looking, knew the effect she had. He had observed their classmates enough to recognize it. Her hazel eyes behind rimmed glasses seemed to peer right through you. Her appearance was unremarkable in general, but the way she made people feel as if their secrets could be exposed if she stared long enough set her apart. She tended to make younger or more innocent students flustered, but those who could handle her sharpness were at less risk. Aika asked what an Act 1 boss would look like, and Issei said that if he, Matsuda, and Motohama were characters, the story would branch with separate origin chapters. Aika called that tragic and overly complicated. Issei shrugged and said that it would at least give the game more replay value. He told himself to cut the conversation short before Drake made his night miserable with whatever the dragon had planned. Issei reflected on how some media got far too much attention. Vampires that sparkled, in his opinion, were absurd. Then Aika suggested he must have imagined something that would set a horde of angry girls chasing him. Issei muttered that if those followers chased him off a cliff, the world might be better for it, though he knew he would be fine. A silent staring contest had begun between the notorious flirt from the east side of town, Issei Hairu, and Aika, who returned his stare with an equally intense glare. Then a third student approached, breaking the tension. The newcomer had blonde hair framing his face, gray-blue eyes, and a mole beneath one eye. That Issei had long assumed was fake. There was a friendly, disarming smile on his face, one that Issei recognized. Aika admired the newcomer, a light blush on her cheeks. Her expression shifted when her gaze landed on his uniform. Issei guessed why her mood changed and thought to adjust his posture with a book or bag to be inconspicuous. Motohama's ability was different. Issei's friend had considered all possibilities when he gave his assessments. Issei noted that it would be hypocritical to forbid fraternizing with the enemy given their current company, and he gestured toward the open seat in front of the newcomer. He expected Matsuda and Motohama would have plenty to say about this later. Kiba accepted the seat and placed his tray on the table, setting a book beside it. Issei found it odd that the young knight intended to read in the cafeteria after asking to sit with them. Issei asked why Kiba had chosen to sit with him as he took a bite, thinking the cafeteria food was passable for a school run by wealthy devils. Kiba said their conversation yesterday had been entertaining, and Issei cut him off, saying they would not revisit that because of the bad joke. Kiba admitted he was surprised by how much it had affected Issei. Issei observed Kiba's attentive interest and felt a twinge of envy at how easily the man's looks and manner drew attention while he remained overlooked. Issei decided not to pursue the sensitive topic further, aware it could lead to trouble. He also knew how Kiba had become a devil, so certain jokes about priests were risky. On a personal level, Issei avoided some subjects because of old memories. Issei turned his attention back to Kiba to steer the conversation elsewhere and asked if Kiba normally ate with his club, deliberately using the nickname the students gave it. Kiba explained that the club president and vice president were off campus and that Kaneko was not much for conversation, and Issei noticed a small twitch at Kiba's mouth that Aika had not seen. Issei guessed there might be some devil-related reason behind the expression and thought it could be connected to Riser. After receiving a flyer yesterday, Issei had indeed expected some encounter with the redhead sooner or later, although not like this. Issei commented that it must be inconvenient to have friends bail, and Kiba said it was fine, that he did not need to be around them all the time and that a change of pace could be pleasant. Aika teased that surely he would rather be with two of the most popular girls on campus, and Issei could not argue with the logic. Kiba said that while those girls were beautiful, Rias and Aquino had been very kind to him and had helped him since he met them. Issei joined the friendly teasing by suggesting Kiba might have a personal quirk that none of those girls fit, and Aika smiled, ready to continue their banter. Kiba appeared puzzled, but the conversation moved on. Issei wondered what kind of preference Kiba might have. He noticed Kiba's eyes glaze over as if distracted. He recalled the sports day when a runner twisted her ankle and Kiba had escorted her to the infirmary, but nothing had come of that. Issei offered another suggestion, saying perhaps Kiba preferred someone who appreciated being cared for. Kiba seemed to welcome the change of topic. Issei thought they might be able to nudge Kiba toward a tactical retreat. He knew Drake would give him a hard time later, so there was little harm in teasing him now. Kiba then mentioned he had heard that Issei had found a new romantic interest and congratulated him. Kiba's smile appeared genuine, and Issei felt a brief tension at the shift in subject as he thought about Yuma, who had been detected because he used techniques unique to a devil. Kaneko should have been able to notice, but the girl all but shunned her true nature. The little rook would have had to get almost nose to nose with the fallen to sniff it out. Aika turned her eyes to him with an eyebrow raised and a curious expression. It was well known among their classmates that Aika loved gossip. Juicy information tended to reach her ears before most others. He was not sure how she managed it. Issei told her he did not have a girlfriend. Technically true. While the date the day before had gone better than expected, he and Yuma had agreed to see where things went. They had spent time together and agreed to take things slowly. As happy as he was getting to know Yuma, Issei was not naive enough to think she would stay in Kuo for long, though he did not want her to leave. He sighed inwardly. He still had not told Sarah. Kiba mentioned that he had heard Issei had gone on a date with a beauty the previous day. Issei wanted to tell Kiba to leave him alone. Kiba had been using Kaneko's shadowing as a source for rumors. It was a cheap trick and Issei could not understand what the other guy hoped to gain. Aika asked if that was why he had not gone with the others the day before. She had a hand to her chin and studied him in a way that made him uncomfortable. Issei said he had a prior engagement. Aika pointed out that the sports clubs had not finished practice until 20 minutes after he had finished, and he was more surprised that she knew the schedule than by anything else. He asked how she knew where they had been going. That question could have terrible consequences for his two friends. He admitted that it had been a bad idea to have been in that area, but curiosity sometimes got the better of people. Aika offered to trade information for information, making the proposal with a playful tilt of her brow. Issei had to decide quickly. He did not want more people snooping into his life, and Ika was persistent. The reputation of being a pervert gave him a sort of cover. It made others less likely to pry unless he actually did something wrong. A nagging thought reminded him that Drake had warned him about this. The red and white dragon emperors had never been allowed a peaceful life. There was always someone who fancied themselves the next big thing and wanted to take down the wielder of a legendary sacred gear. Drake had said that Issei was experiencing a length of relative peace none of his hosts had ever achieved once the gear had been activated. If they managed to unlock Balance Breaker, fighting seemed to be all that followed. Issei wondered how many of those fights had been in self-defense rather than loss of control. As for whether to tell Ika anything, Issei was unsure. He had little definitive information and disliked speculation. If he did not know something for sure, he would not say it. The only part he would not hide was her name. He told Ika he had nothing to tell her. The risk of slipping up was too great. One careless word or one sighting could undo the hard work of staying hidden. Matsuda and Motohama were friends, but Sarah and the others felt like family. He had so little in terms of family. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch and the few minutes before classes restarted. Issei tried to tell himself that his thoughts had nothing to do with the developing relationship he was exploring with a fallen angel. He was not entirely successful. Rias drummed her fingers on the desk, the only outlet she allowed for her frustration. If she had taken after her mother more, she might have started breaking things, but Venerana's teachings had been thorough: remain calm, collected, and thoughtful even in the face of danger. The power of destruction made their bodies conduits for devastation, and it had to be controlled, especially while living in the human world. Rias would not claim to be without moments of anger, but no one in her family would believe such an admission, so she did not bother. Taking the day off from school had been a poor choice. She should have demanded the meeting be scheduled for late afternoon to accommodate her. Perhaps then Kaneko could have reported on the prospective peerage member she had observed that morning. Maybe there would have been something in Kaneko's findings to lift her mood. Issei Hayudu. At first glance there was nothing remarkable about him. For over a year she had noticed nothing. But a little over a month ago she had felt something, an impression that someone nearby was concealing something spectacular. Rias could not describe it more accurately than that, and it did not match any sensation she had experienced with other supernatural entities or sacred gears. Even Gasper, the sealed mutation bishop, had given a more directed feeling than this. It had taken almost 2 weeks to narrow down the source. The sensation had been like a gentle tug, similar to when Millicass had been a baby and had pulled on her pinky, so light, but so certain. Both her brother and her parents acknowledged that she had a gift for finding people: Aquino, the daughter of a fallen angel cadre; Kiba, an orphan of the church; and Gasper, a damper with the ability to stop. But this one felt different. Having not felt it the previous year, Rias had suspected a first-year student. She searched hall after hall, class after class, and found nothing. Since there were no new second years, she checked the third years, because several had been new to Kuo. Kyom was the only one who triggered that non-human feeling, but Rias knew the tennis captain was a beast tamer. They had talked about it openly. A few days later, after speaking with her sister-in-law, Rias felt it again. School had been let out, so she was free to wander the grounds. She was confused to be led near the kendo club. Most members were third years and already vetted. But then the feeling began to fade. She followed it along the tree line, keeping out of view. The edge of the building revealed 3 boys. Rias only knew their reputations and could not place names to faces. One bald with heavy features, one with long black hair and glasses, and one in baggy clothes with brown shaggy hair and an easy air. She could not tell which one was responsible, but she resolved to find out. The trio had an unsavory reputation. Getting their names was easy. Aquino had kept her ears open and had even spoken to the one with glasses before, though he had only grinned and acted awkwardly. Aquino had admitted she was looking forward to an opportunity to fluster him. Surzex had contacted Rias one night to ask how things were going and whether she was enjoying Japan. Rias had said yes and mentioned she suspected a potentially powerful person nearby whom she might recruit. The next day she saw him without his 2 friends, and the feeling pulsed like a separate heartbeat within her. Walking by him on the staircase had been difficult because all she wanted to do was stare and try to figure him out. She was surprised when he did not even notice her passing. That was strange, because the humans at her school always noticed her presence. He had looked different then, more assured. That was the closest description she could find. There was something in his gaze she had only seen twice before, something more than what he showed others. She was certain of that, though she did not know the specifics. So Rias watched and tried to piece together what she knew. It was not much, but a vague idea formed. That feeling must have been his sacred gear activating, and the look she had seen was the boost of confidence such a mystical tool would grant a normal human. She had not detected any power sources in town to support the theory until she heard Kaniko's report. Until then it was the best hypothesis she had. Aquino moved with practiced ease, carrying a tray of tea and snacks that did not wobble. Aquino asked whether the meeting was still bothering Rias or if something else was wrong as they walked. Rias hummed indecisively and did not answer aloud. Everything weighed on her mind. The clink of the tray drew Rias's aquamarine eyes away from a swirl of grains in the wood. Rias told Aquino that a rating game was the only way out of their predicament, and that they did not have the power to win. She said that if it were all of them against Riser himself, there might be a chance, but a full peerage against a man who could regenerate nearly endlessly was different. She let the thought trail off as the cup and saucer were placed in front of her and saw Aquino's concerned expression. Her fiancé had been conspicuously attentive during the meeting, and Rias admitted inwardly that she wished she had the same strength as her mother or brother. She imagined how satisfying it would be to see that smug expression wiped away. Rumors had been circulating about Riser's relationships with members of his peerage. That gossip was left unexamined publicly. Rias noted bitterly that, by devil law, a peerage was considered an asset or possession, and she reflected on how marriage could change the balance of power. People wondered why many high-class devils married their queen. The queen was the closest confidant and second in command, and marriage kept power consolidated. Aquino began to suggest that if only Lord Lucifer could intervene. Rias replied that he could not show favoritism, and that any interference by her brother would likely cause more trouble and could be used against her later. She did not relish the idea of favors being held over her. Aquino looked like she was about to say more, but the door opened and Kaniko and Kiba entered, cutting her off. Aquino's planned remark died on her lips with the new onlookers present. Kaniko's expression remained impassive, while Kiba's smile appeared strained. Rias greeted them and asked how school had been. Kaniko said quietly that nothing new had happened. Kiba said that it had been quite pleasant, if for a moment a bit strange, and thanked Rias as president. As Aquino served tea and snacks, supplemented by Kaniko's own provisions, Rias watched her two servants and wondered who to question first. Kaniko's report could derail any focus on what Kiba might have experienced, so Rias prioritized the night of the group. Rias asked Kiba if something was bothering him, noting that he seemed tense. Kiba's discomfort was visible. He had encountered a situation that had unnerved him, not greatly, but enough to show. Her night did not look particularly stressed, but there was something on his mind. The smile he offered was easier, thankful, yet he still shook his head as if expecting to hear of some slight wrong done to him. He explained that it was not that anything was wrong. He had merely been part of a conversation with Issei Haidu and Aika Kiryu during lunch, and it had taken him by surprise. Rias steadied her expression and tried to keep her tone level and calm, only slightly interested. Only Aquino seemed to notice how much the matter truly mattered to her. Aquino's gaze held an amused curiosity at Rias's sudden focus on such an unexpected target. Rias asked what had transpired during the conversation that had rattled him. He recounted the events of the lunch. One detail in particular seemed odd to Rias, but first she needed more from Kaniko. Turning to the small rook who was nibbling her candies, Rias asked what Kaniko had observed the previous night. Kaniko hesitated between answering her king and taking another bite, but duty won out. She said he had seemed mostly normal, almost as if he had an identical twin until they came out from the woods. Both Rias and Aquino raised an eyebrow. Aquino's expression suggested she suspected something private had occurred. Rias asked if Kaniko had lost sight of them. Kaneko nodded and explained that they had been too conspicuous to remain unnoticed. Though a rook, Kaneko's smaller frame and species made her light on her feet, a whisper when she wanted to be. If she couldn't stay out of sight, then that was how it was. When Rias asked how long they had been there, Kaneko estimated 10 minutes or so. Her face then creased with guarded confusion. The girl had changed when they walked out, Kaneko offered. It was not merely confidence. From the moment they left the apartment building, he had seemed to have his attention fixed on her. Whether she was a neighbor or had been in his apartment was unclear. Kaneko had not found a way to know for certain. Kaneko felt the girl had allowed some facade to fall away and had simply been herself. The observation struck Kaneko as strange. She wondered why anyone would choose to be around someone she thought unappealing. The first portion of the date had been ordinary and conversation had continued smoothly after the woods, but the looks exchanged between the two had shifted. They had shared a brief, public display of affection that Kaneko did not appreciate. She was not fond of public displays of affection. With that information, Rias returned to her earlier question. Why would Issei deny outright that he had a date? Her curiosity only increased her desire to meet him. The summoning flyer had not yet worked, so she considered how best to approach the situation. Issei sat on his couch with Yuma in a position he had found himself in before, though never with her. He answered that he preferred crunchy peanut butter. Yuma raised her head in surprise and then relaxed back down. Issei repeated his choice firmly. They exchanged light, teasing banter about the preference, which left Issei a little flustered. He muttered that she was a tease. Rainier found the quiet companionship pleasant. She enjoyed the easy closeness even as she knew she would need to leave earlier than most dates. She had told Issei she would have to go early, and he accepted her explanation without pressing for details. Later, Rainier reflected on why Issei had not asked further. She thought perhaps he was trusting by nature, or perhaps the other woman had trained him not to ask too many questions. She could not decide which explanation was better. Among the fallen, some took their charms further than she did, but she considered herself more restrained. She would not call them promiscuous. With the missions they had, sometimes they had to turn a situation to their advantage. To her surprise, Issei shifted the conversation away from the obvious direction she had been steering it. Issei asked whether she was an animal person. Rainier wondered if that should bother her. She was not in her true form, though little was different besides height, and she had expected Issei to steer the talk toward a predictable topic. She reminded herself not to be surprised after the events of the previous night. Their relationship had been gradually developing, but she did not feel she had to share every passing thought. She was curious where things might lead. Rainier paused and then said she did not mean exotic animals but rather dogs, cats, and the like. Her expression hardened as she added that if anyone kept pets with more than 4 legs she would leave and never set foot in their home again. She had an unpleasant memory and decided not to elaborate. She also warned that if someone owned one of those full-body animal suits where the mouth moved, she would react strongly and withdraw. Issei looked both shocked and amused at her answer, then laughed and mentioned he was more of a dog person. Rainier acknowledged that spiders and centipedes were common dislikes and that other things could be unsettling. Issei expressed strong, hyperbolic disdain toward furries. Rainier did not disagree but suspected there was a story behind his animosity. Under the cover of darkness, Issei walked through the woods bordering Kuo. Yuma had not stayed much longer before leaving after a brief goodbye. Issei was glad she had not been present when a dispatch to take out a stray came through. A human would not have noticed the magic affecting a specific shelf in his living room that acted like a transport tube for communications, but a fallen certainly would. With Ria still without a full peerage, the higher-ups hesitated to assign her even a B-rank stray, let alone an A or S rank. Sona could have assisted, but territory divisions made it the task of the Gremory heiress. Drake was pleased to see some combat, short-lived as it had been. Issei had agreed to use boosted gear only on the creature that had at least once resembled a humanoid. Doing so granted Issei some measure of atonement in Drake's eyes for the earlier conversation with Aika. Issei questioned how the opponent could have been classified as A rank when it had felt weaker. Drake pointed out that it had been a long time since Issei had been in a fight requiring more than a single strike in his base form. Issei thought for a moment and said it had been a few months. Drake corrected that it had been over a year and noted that the manticore had lasted as long as it did because Issei had not led his shots properly. Issei winced at the memory. That battle had been difficult. Drake clarified that his point was not just about timing but that Issei was still growing, his body adapting to new power. Much of his hardest training had occurred before or during the early stages of PBR2I, and progress had slowed since the day he defeated Graphia. Issei understood where Drake was going. He asked with unease how much stronger he had become. Being selected as Sarah's queen would spark heated debate among the pillars. The other queens were pure-blooded and notable, while he was simply a boy who had inherited a dangerous gift. If his power had crossed a significant threshold, the debates would be the least of his concerns. How many assassins had been sent after Tannen when he was reincarnated and almost immediately given an ultimate class promotion? Some of the pillar members were petty, paranoid, and primitive in what they believed was best for Devil Society. Drake thought it was hard to say, but he doubted there were enough to let Issei decisively defeat his king in Balance Breaker. Issei swore under his breath at that hint. He and Drake had agreed they should compare his strength to others in either his base form or Balance Breaker, not the unstable new thing. It was still too unpredictable, and the secrecy he had to maintain meant he couldn't train it. The power drain no longer worried him as much as the way it felt utterly different and how often he lost control. By the time Issei reached his building, he was ready for home. He unlocked the door, climbed the stairs, and thought again about the flaws in the peerage system and how the higher-ups handled stray hunts, especially after the incident with the SS stray Kuro. He expected the familiar glow of the lamp by the door and the hallway light between the living room and bedroom, so he was surprised when he stepped into darkness. His devil vision was the only reason he could see at all, and even that came with a faint red tint as magic translated the scene for him. From below the TV came a slow, rhythmic song, and an unmistakable scent filled the air. A smile spread across his face at the memory of a similar night. When he called Sarah's name, he stumbled slightly and then caught himself as she leapt into his arms. Sarah embraced him warmly and whispered that she had missed him, pressing her cheek to his neck. Issei felt both elated and nervous. He could no longer avoid the conversation he needed to have. He allowed himself a moment, saying he had missed her as well, and used the pause to steady his thoughts. Sarah then said she had something important to tell him, and Issei replied that he did too, but suggested they begin calmly. She indicated she wanted to talk privately, and Issei agreed. They moved to the bedroom to speak in private.